The Old Dogs REI Network podcast is sponsored by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, and vegetarians get lower rates on their life insurance. Go to healthiq/old dog, that's healthiq/old dog, to see if you qualify.
This episode of the Old Dogs REI Network is brought to you by Mino Studio.
In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief old dog, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is a show where 50-plussers and anyone else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes, type in Old Dog, spelled D-A-W-G, find our podcast, and subscribe. Wow. Well, we have a great show for you today, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. You know, we have a lot of great guests on this show. We're all from all different walks of life. Well, our next guest is one of these guys. I'm just going to say he's one of the smart guys. Okay. I mean, this guy is a really smart guy. And, we've had pretty big names, mega successful entrepreneurs, attorneys, CPAs, mega rich investors, authors, celebrities, all this stuff. But this guy, he's just brilliant. His name is, well, actually, I've got kind of he doesn't know this, but I kind of gave him like a little nickname. And, he's from New York. He's Italian. Okay, I'm Italian, so we're going to call him the godfather of real estate investment analysis. Okay. And if I had that music in the background, I'd be playing da 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 da. Either that or the godfather of cash flow, one or the other. But either way, Frank Gallinelli is the author of the best-selling book, What Every Real Estate Investor Needs to Know About Cash Flow. Now in its third edition, as well as other books and numerous articles on real estate investing and finance. He is a graduate of Yale University with a BA in psychology and of Southern Connecticut State University with an MS in education. He serves as an adjunct assistant professor of real estate development at Columbia University, where he has taught real estate investment analysis in the graduate school since 2003. Gallinelli has been involved in real estate for more than 40 years and is the founder and president of Real Data, a real estate software firm that has offered analysis tools for investors and developers for over 3 decades. Wow, that's quite a mouthful. Frank, welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network.
Well, hello, Bill, and thank you for having me. I guess you know an old dog when you see one.
That's right. After 40 years in this business, you definitely qualify. You got to be.
Something I tell my grad students, during one of the case studies that I do at Columbia, I get into the conversation about. I tell them this is going to be a politically incorrect moment, so brace yourselves. I says because there's a connection between the age of an investor and the investor's tolerance for risk. And I said, and so I put myself into this case. I said, think about it from my point of view. He says, look at me. He says, I don't even buy green bananas anymore. I mean, I'm so old. So think about it from the point of view of an old dog like me.
Well, Frank, you're definitely an old dog who knows a lot of new tricks. I'll tell you, something new. It seems like every time I look up something about you, and you're just a very active guy who does a lot of things. And so we're just real glad to have you here as our guest. Boy, we've been trying to put this together for a while here, but it finally came together. So I'm really stoked, and I think our guests are just going to love having you on.
Well, it's a delight to be here, Bill.
Yeah, Frank, let's just give us a little background where you came from and how you got into this world of real estate investing and all the side related businesses to that.
Oh, geez, this is a story that covers 40 years. I think it's going to take a little longer than Dr. Zhivago if I really go through the whole thing here. But it's really almost like a serial serendipity of events. That got me from the beginning to the point where I am now. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, I was teaching public school in New Haven. And as you might imagine, at some point it occurred to me that this was probably not the path to financial independence. So I discovered I could earn more in real estate, first as an agent and then as an investor. So I did. I switched careers, and that got me recruited to be a sales manager for a firm that was one of the original movers and shakers in the CCIM program. If you're familiar with that, it's the educational program for commercial realtors. And curiously enough, this guy was also an early adopter of computer technology for real estate. I mean, we actually had this great big room in our real estate company with computers in it. And these were computers that used cassette tapes to store data. So you can see how far back we're talking about here. So, I got myself involved with real estate and computers back before either of those things was either fashionable or even viable. So fast forward a little bit then, and I got involved in helping out a family business. And so I figured, well, I'm going to try one of these new contraptions that I saw called a personal computer. See if I can't help them, set up the family here, setting up their accounting. And back then, if I invited everybody to dinner who owned a personal computer, I would have had some empty chairs around my dining room table. Okay? So I seem to have gotten a little bit ahead of the game here, a little bit ahead of myself in just about everything I've tried. But it happened that at that same time, I wanted to acquire a piece of commercial property. So I took one from column A here and one from column B. I took something that some of the stuff that I had learned, working in the commercial real estate firm, where I ended up teaching my agents, by the way, how to analyze income properties. And I took the other, which was the computer that I just bought to help the family business. Says, well, let me see if I can put those two things together and figure out, the best way to make this deal on this commercial property. After I did that, and I actually did acquire the property, I said, well, you know what? Maybe somebody else could use this solution that I just came up with. And so that's how I started Real Data Software. I said, let me see if I can sell this analysis model that I just made. And that was sort of the light bulb that went off in my head there. It says, I'll bet you some other people could use this. And so now we're, 30 some odd years. That was 1982, I think. So we're 36 years now into, if I did the math right in my head, it'd be embarrassing if I didn't, right? So we're still running the company. We're still providing software tools for investors and also developers after all those years. So that's how I kind of got from ground zero into the real estate and technology part. But then there was yet one more, I guess, if you want to call it, occasion of serendipity. I must be a little bit of a slow learner myself, because it took me a couple of years to notice that people who were, buying our analysis software and then calling us up and asking questions, it finally occurred to me that there were at least a meaningful number of people who were out there doing deals who had, how shall I put this, had perhaps a less than perfect understanding of the finance that's involved in real estate investing. And that's what got me started really on this whole idea of advancing financial literacy for people in real estate. I felt that, there's no point in making tools for people to analyze properties if they don't really understand what the results mean.
Right.
I think the watershed moment, if you will, I even wrote an article about this once. Guy calls me up, and he says, your software is baloney. This stuff doesn't work. I can't figure out the rate of return on this deal, on this property that I want to buy. And I says, oh, okay. Well, tell me a little about the deal. He says, well, I'm buying this property for $1 million. I'm getting an $800,000 first mortgage. I'm getting a $200,000 second mortgage, and it won't calculate the rate of return. I says, the rate of return on what exactly? You've got $1 million property. You're financing 800 plus 200. That's $1 million. So you don't have anything invested. How can you have a return? And he didn't get it.
Oh man.
So I said, well, okay, let's see if we can't make a dent in the level of understanding of how this kind of stuff works. So I started writing articles for our website. Now, today you would call those blog posts, but I am an old dog, all right, Bill? And so
they didn't have blogs back then.
We're talking back to when there weren't blogs. We just called them articles. So I was writing articles. And so there I am minding my own business. And another serendipitous connection occurs. The phone rings one day. And it's an editor at McGraw-Hill. Now, I don't know anything about the publishing business, certainly not when that phone rang. I don't know a whole lot more about it now, but I knew nothing whatsoever. So this guy calls me up. He's an editor at McGraw-Hill. He says, I've read some of your articles. Oh, I said, oh, you mean my blog post? No,
or was it in the news group or something? It might have been.
You remember those, huh?
Yeah.
Showing the page there, fella. Okay. Anyway, so he says, kind of looked like interesting stuff. You interested in writing a book? Now, I didn't realize that when an editor calls you from downtown Manhattan at the 77th floor or whatever it is on 6th Avenue, that you're supposed to, take this kind of stuff seriously. You're supposed to be impressed. I didn't know any better. So I just gave the guy a hard time. And he said, well, what we were thinking, I'm going to send you a copy of a book that we published some years ago. We were thinking something along these lines. So take a look at it and tell me if you agree and you want to do something like this. So he sends me this book, and I look at it. Now I have a reasonably good handle on mathematics. This book is filled with calculus and a lot of terminology that I had absolutely no understanding of. So I call the guy back, the editor back, and I say, I've been dealing with real estate investors through our software company, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of investors over the last however many decades it was at the point that we were having this conversation. I said, I think I could identify 3 people who could understand the book you just sent me. By the way, I'm not one of them. So I think if you want me to write a book, I'm going to write something, that maybe somebody can understand and that might be useful. He was a little taken aback, but he said, okay, send me a couple of chapters and we'll see what happens. And the rest, as they say, is history. I think the book has had, as you had mentioned at the beginning, it's now in its 3rd edition, each subsequent edition having a little bit more content and whatnot. I'm not even going to tell you how many copies it sold because it so exceeded my expectations or theirs that it's unimaginable. But I think I may have hit kind of a sweet spot in the spectrum of the kinds of books that people write about real estate and real estate investing. At the one end, we got the sort of thing that he sent me, which is you know highly academic and appeals to a very small academic audience. The other end, which is the end of the spectrum that makes me a little crazy, quite frankly, is all this get rich quick hype and motivational stuff that it's basically cheerleading, and it has very little actionable
Substance.
concept or substance to it.
Right.
And I think I may have just been lucky enough to hit the sweet spot in the middle, where it's I think if you got to look to me to give you motivation to make a success out of your life, then there's something definitely wrong with that picture. So I'm not going to be your source of motivation. I'm sorry. Go find your own motivation. And if you think that as these other books will tell you, that you can get rich in real estate with no time, no experience, no credit, no cash, and all the rest of it, well, if any of that were true, then just about everybody would be a millionaire. And so clearly that must not be true either. So I think I'm happy in being in my little niche somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. I think we've got another link or two here in this serendipitous chain that I am now I'm doing this episode of This Is Your Life here that I'm trying to recreate. But I think it was the book that got the next unexpected phone call from somebody who had a connection with the graduate program at Columbia, who said, "Yeah, let's talk about maybe you'd want to come in and do some teaching at Columbia." So that's how I got into that gig. It was a direct offshoot from the book. I've been doing that now, for 13, 14 years, I think. Having a great time with the students who come from all over the world. These are, although they're grad students, they're not just the kind of your garden variety, newly minted grad students. A lot of these folks have already had experience in finance and are essentially reinventing themselves a bit, and they come with perspectives from literally all over the globe. And I managed to con them into believing that I know what I'm talking about, because I talk very, very fast. It's been a lot of fun doing that, and I think I learn more than they do from the interactions that we have. So that's kind of where I've gotten to the point where I am. But then I took I took the idea of the book and of the teaching at Columbia, and I decided to take it yet one step further not too long ago, and put together a lot of this same kind of content for an online video course, so that people could access this without my having to get on Metro North, having to go down to the city to do it in person. Other people now from wherever can. You perhaps will not get the benefit of the one-on-one live charisma of my presence, but you still get my voice and you still get my content. So I'm hoping that has at least a little bit of value, and can help me with my campaign about financial literacy.
Well, that's a great story, I'll tell you, and that last part is really what hit me right between the eyes. I go, gee whiz, here is the opportunity for me, personally as an investor, to be able to access the content that you have in your course at Columbia, and and analysis is so important. I mean, there are a few key things that about real estate investing. There's the art of negotiation. There's a few key things that got to understand finance, but if you can't analyze a property properly, you're never gonna succeed in real estate investment. So I mean, such a critical component, and yet here you're doing something to make that more accessible to the regular Joes out there like me that really want to know and understand all the implications of a good analysis of a property. So I think we'll probably get into a little bit more as we move forward here. But thank you for sharing that journey, which is no, it's fascinating. It really is. It's just you've from high school teacher here to this internationally recognized authority on real estate investing. It's pretty cool. So there's I could probably keep you on this phone. Well, I might not want to stay, but I mean, if I could, I could literally talk to you for hours because there is so much in it, and I love the book. And the book is one that I have read and value, and I think it has helped me a great deal. And there's just a couple of things that I might want to zero in on the analysis side of things, because I know the folks listening, they're from many different backgrounds, and some are just starting out. Maybe they're looking to buy a single family home to start investing to maybe generate a little extra cash flow in retirement, or maybe they're already buying apartment buildings. There's quite a cross section of folks that listen to the show, but I wanted to just zero in on just a few points of analysis, and maybe you could give us some insight there. It just again, I recommend everybody listening to this is really get his book. The book is amazing. It's got everything in there. It's probably a little advanced for me, so I have to read it a little bit slow when he gets to the numbers. But it's definitely not. We're not doing calculus there. And I was really surprised when I got the book and saw the cover didn't have bikini clad models and Lamborghinis. I was just kind of going, this isn't a real estate investing book, but I'm thankful for that. No, and no, it's the real. This is how you do it, step by step, and analysis is something that I think that, and you like. It's so logically put together too, so you can start off simple and then get the fuller picture as you progress through the book, which is great. But I've had some questions about analysis, and just some of the key points is are there certain metrics that you would say are the key metrics an investor absolutely must know when analyzing a property?
Well, yeah, absolutely. First of all, you need to know how to get at those metrics to begin with. So you need to have the foundation that gets you to that point. And we can talk some more about that. But in terms of the key metrics, the first one is pretty obvious, and that's cash flow. Cash flow, and none of this stuff, by the way, is rocket science. I probably should not be the person to admit that, as someone who traffics in education and in analytical tools and whatnot. But the fact is that if you just stop and think about this for a moment and kind of take it in a big picture sort of way, it really isn't that complicated, and it really isn't that difficult to absorb. But cash flow, obviously, is just the difference between all the money that comes in minus all the money that goes out. And a property needs to have a positive cash flow, because the idea of investing is that your investment property is going to support you, not the other way around. So you have to have more cash coming in than not. And that's why I say that when you're analyzing a property, one of the first and very simple things that you absolutely positively need to do is to take a hard-headed look as to whether or not you're going to have a positive cash flow from that property, right from the beginning. As a side note to the question of cash flow, one of the things I would also add is that what I see a lot of beginning investors paying a lot of attention to is the cash-on-cash return. And I've got a series of what are now blog posts, no longer articles, on that subject, because I don't think cash-on-cash return deserves the amount of love and affection that it gets by beginning investors. Cash-on-cash return can give you a kind of a reasonable look at how things start off, how the property is going to perform at a point in time. That point in time being essentially the very first year that you own it. But cash-on-cash return does not take into account the time value of money, which is a key element to analyzing any investment, whether it's real estate or anything else. And I think it's even more important when you're analyzing real estate than most other investments, because a typical real estate investment is something that you're likely to be holding on to for a period of time. Okay? It's not like a stock, for example, where you can call up your broker today and say, that was a bad decision I made last week. Why don't we sell that? You're not going to turn over your real estate investment quite that. You're not going to turn it on a dime. So you don't want to use a metric like cash on cash return that focuses on a point in time, because you are not investing for a point in time. You're investing for an extended period of time, which is why I tell investors that they really need to look at internal rate of return, which is probably the most comprehensive metric for understanding the return on a property held over a period of time, right through the disposition of that property, right until you get rid of it, because you really haven't, really figured out what you've made on something, on any investment, until you finally sell it. So that I think is one of the essential rate of return metrics. Now I'll tell you that I get some pushback from investors who say, I don't believe in making those projections as to how a property is going to perform in the future. It's kind of like trying to, it's kind of like fortune telling. I want to look just at how it's performing now and make my decision about this property just on how it's performing now. And my retort to that is that if you're going to judge a property that you're going to hold for a period of time just on how it's performing now, well, then you're indulging in your own version of fortune telling, because your version says that if it's okay now, it's going to be okay in the future. But that may not necessarily be true. That may not necessarily be a sensible assumption to make, especially if it's a commercial property where you've got leases in place, which may go level for a couple of years, then go bump up, and then the leases are going to expire, and those businesses you don't think are going to stay there, and you're going to have a vacancy for a period of time. You may not necessarily have some kind of a smooth, unbroken flow of revenue from a property. And you really do need to look at what it's going to perform like realistically in future years, and not just assume that future years are going to be more or less like the current year, which is what the assumption you're making when you make that statement that I want to just look at the current performance, the current cash on cash return. I'm going to give you just one more metric, Bill.
Sure.
I think I think it's very important that I don't see investors paying attention to until I tell them go pay attention to it. And see, this is even true of my students. And I'm going to tell you in a moment how it is that I get my students to analyze properties. So I think you might find that little story interesting. But this metric is debt coverage ratio. It's the ratio of net operating income to the annual debt service. And obviously you need to have more net income than you have debt service, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to pay your mortgage. And this is something that a lot of investors, when they're thinking of, I'm going to really crank up this other people's money logic, and I'm going to finance this thing, right up to the ridge beam, and get it, get the biggest mortgage I can, and then get a second mortgage to for the rest and all of it. And they don't look at the debt coverage ratio, which will tell both them and their potential lenders whether or not they really can afford to carry this property without having to dig into their own pocket to cover the debt. So debt coverage ratio, I think, is an important metric that every investor ought to look at with every income property that they take into consideration.
That's great. Those are three excellent metrics. IRR though is that's probably the closest to calculus for me, because there are these variables, inflationary factors and appreciation. I can do a cash on cash, in my head, but IRR.
And that's one of the reasons for popularity of it, quite frankly, because it's simple. It is simple to do, and you can compare it to the return on your CD. But the IRR, when you get right down to it, is not that difficult. If you use our company software, it's not difficult at all because we do it for you.
I love it.
But but
I'm
even if you
sold.
don't, but even if you don't, I try to explain it both in my book and in my online course so that it makes some kind of logical sense. Because quite frankly, my experience in the past has been that even relatively sophisticated investors didn't take the time to learn really what it meant and how it worked. They simply assumed that more is better than less. But it's really not that difficult to when you take the pieces apart and look at them in the cold light of day. Not that difficult really to make sense out of it.
Yeah, that's true. I think on the debt coverage ratio too. I'm glad you mentioned that because, especially if you're doing commercial, the loans are not simple. They're generally balloon payments involved. There are also the penalties. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 penalties, and these other factors in there that if you decide, hey, we're peaking out at 3 years on this property, and we're going to have to, it'd make more sense to sell now. You've got a lot of things that are going to affect your bottom line there. That I think you have to be aware of as well. And I think a lot of people just kind of just assume, well, we're going to refi it at this point, or we're going to sell at this point, and you just don't know. It's until you're in it, I guess. So.
There's another kind of a real world practical reason for doing this calculation, and that is that your commercial lender, is going to have a debt coverage ratio requirement. It might be 1.2, 1.25, 1.3, depending upon the property, location, and so on. If you bring a deal into a commercial lender and you run the numbers and you don't have the satisfactory debt coverage ratio, lender's going to look at you and say, why are you wasting my time? Please don't come back here anymore.
Right. Great point.
Okay. You don't know what you're doing. So if you're coming in here and demonstrating that you don't know what you're doing, exactly why was it that you wanted us to loan you money?
Right.
Okay, so and I beat this point through to my grad students, but these are people who are going to be really going out into the commercial real estate world, either in investment banking or in commercial development or whatever. So, if you advertise to the world at large that you don't know what you're doing, you can have a short career. You really are.
Right. Great point. Really. What would you say the top analysis mistakes are? I mean, you have both from your student side and you have people that subscribe to your software and so forth. What would you say the ones that just really pop out? And maybe this might get to that foundation question, I don't know, but what would you say those mistakes would be?
You got a couple of hours we could talk about this? Maybe we could make this like Downton Abbey and have like 5 seasons with 8 episodes. No, I'll try to make this kind of brief. But there are some that jump off the canvas, if you will, from my experience with investors who are that we deal with who maybe are looking at our software, or questions I get on message boards and whatnot. That sort of thing. But I think one of the ones that rises right to the top is that investors, beginning investors. Let's focus on the folks who are the startups, if you will.
Right.
They don't do adequate due diligence at the beginning, especially due diligence about the market in which the property lives. Now, most beginning investors will say, okay, yeah, I got to do my due diligence, which means I've got to make sure that they told me the right amount for the property taxes or the right amount for the rents or whatever. But properties don't live in a vacuum. So you shouldn't be looking at any properties until you've done due diligence about the market. You should know what the prevailing market rents are. You should know what the prevailing capitalization rates are for the particular type of property that you're going to be looking at in that market. You should know what the prevailing vacancy is for those kinds of properties. You need to know what's going on, what kind of businesses might be moving in or moving out. You need to know about the market before you know about the properties. The second, and this is one I see all the time, is that folks starting out don't know the vocabulary of real estate investing.
Mm.
They use terms incorrectly. As I will tell my grad students, when they give me an analysis, you've used a term that does not exist in nature. and this is a lot more important than it may sound with me just telling you about it. And that's because it gets back to that same thing that I was just talking about with debt coverage ratio. If you use terms incorrectly, there are a couple of things that are going to happen, and all of them are bad. Number one is that more deals have been killed by a failure to communicate than by probably for any other reason. I mean, it's kind of like the sheriff in Cool Hand Luke here. You know, what we have here is with the mirrored sunglasses and all. It's what we have here is a failure to communicate.
Got to say it with a southern accent. What we have here is a failure to communicate.
If you can't get your point across because you're not speaking their language, the other people's language, how are you going to make a deal? And we also get back to the same notion that I made about the debt coverage ratio. If you use terminology that doesn't exist typically by everybody else who's doing these kinds of deals, you might as well be wearing one of those sandwich boards that says, "I am a beginner. I have never done this before. Why don't you take advantage of me?" It's like an advertisement for incompetence, okay? And these negotiations are serious business, and if you make yourself look foolish, you're pretty much taking yourself out of the game. So the vocabulary, it's not that complicated. It's not that difficult, but it's one of the first things I tell my graduates. I do what I do is when I teach, I have an orientation lecture where I lecture for about 6 or 7 hours in one day, and I call it Real Estate Finance's Greatest Hits. Basically, I take them from one end of the vocabulary to the other and just show them what each of these things means kind of in brief. Like it's like a highlight reel for finance. And I say, I know the half-life of this lecture is pretty short, so I'll give you this stuff as this lecture as a PDF when we're done. But this is where you got to start. You got to know the vocabulary, okay? So those come right to the top of the list. But I can give you a bunch more depending upon how long you want to talk about this.
Well, one of the things I'm kind of curious about too is sometimes, especially if you've got a deal flow going where you just have a lot of different properties that are either coming to you through brokers or maybe you're bringing it in through other ways. There's some deals that just it's on your desk and you can just make a determination. I mean, without even digging into the numbers, that this is someplace I don't want to go. Maybe if you could share kind of the top, those type. I'm calling sort of instant turnoffs that would just like shout out at their from this offering memorandum or this the MLS or wherever you're looking at this property that just says just run the other way. What would you put in that category there?
Well, there's a bunch of things I can mention in that regard as well. And it's I might combine this with one of the big analysis mistakes too, because they kind of fit together. But one of the things that I see as a big mistake is not having adequate data. A lot of people who are beginners will make this as a mistake, but people who are experienced will recognize it as a red flag or a turnoff. And that is, and I even have a case study example that I use both in class and in my online course, where you're given information about a property, but if you really put yourself in the game, you put your head in the game, and you say, I'm going to look at this not based on just what they told me, but how life really works, and imagine myself really owning this property, you will recognize that there must be information missing here that I need to know about. I'll give you a trivial example. That's one of the items that I have. But in an example case that you're looking at a property that that's in the Northeast, and the seller or the broker hasn't bothered to mention anything about snow removal. Okay, so are we going to pretend that the tenants are getting out there with shovels themselves and tin cans?
They have this big blow dryer they just use, which just kind of melts the snow.
The more common one that's actually real is that there'll be no allowance for a property management expense, and then you'll question this and say, oh, that's something you take care of yourself. You do that as the owner. Any appraiser looking at a property is going to plug in a property management expense if you didn't plug one in, for him or her. And the reason being, you go and buy a stock, they're not going to assume that you're going to come and vacuum the hallways for them. You don't have you don't have a property management obligation for other investments that you buy. Why should you have one that uses up your time, and time is money, if you're buying a piece of real estate? So, not seeing all of the potential operating expenses. So that's, if I were now as a more experienced buyer, if you're looking at that kind of thing and you're seeing somebody who's giving you a set of data that is missing things that you think obviously ought to be in there, the words you are saying to yourself mumbled in the background, this is con job 101 here, so maybe I don't really want to spend a whole lot of my time dealing with somebody who thinks I don't know what I'm doing. So that's one of the first things I would say might turn me off. Another one doesn't have to do necessarily with the hard numbers, but with the leases. What if you have, and again, this is an example I use in one of my case studies. What if you're looking at a property and you say, this one kind of has the tenants with somewhat dicey business models. I know I see the leases that are here, and they have numbers, and they have expirations, and everything ought to be fine. But do I really think that this locally owned mom and pop bookstore that has 9 years to go on its lease is not going to get eaten alive by Amazon before that lease is up? Or as in another, I use that example in one of my cases. In another case, I've got a restaurant, and everything looks great, but then I decided I'm going to go have dinner at that restaurant. And I realized the food's lousy and the service is even worse. So do I really believe that even though I've got a lease here, do I really want to rely on the fact that that income stream from that leasehold is going to sustain itself? So these are the kinds of things that you want to look at when you get a proposition on your desk.
Yeah, great point. I remember looking at one apartment that they made the statement in the body copy of the executive summary. There was a once in 100 year flood that happened last year, but implying that it already happened.
So we got 99 to go.
Yeah,
and
so
the leases are only 1 year leases.
That wasn't real reassuring there. Oh, I can wait another 100 years. I don't have to worry. But yeah, there's some strange things sometimes. I don't know if they do that, deliberately just to kind of cover themselves just in case. This is one of those rare years where we didn't expect it to flood once again. One of the things I do want to spend a little bit of time on here before we start to close out really is to look at, you're making this move into the education side of things. Now, granted, you've been in education here pretty much all your life, but you're making something available to us regular folks here that I think, I'd love you just to address a little bit here because, for me, I look at this, I go, I would love to take your class at Columbia. But, I'm looking at I've got to get accepted to the university first. And then second of all, I've got to be able to pay the $74,000 tuition once a year. And I'm kind of going, okay, maybe I don't want the course that bad here. But wait.
For you, 73, I can make a deal for you. Just
Yeah.
negotiate.
I mean, this is like one of those things I'm going, okay, so I went and I looked at your educational page and I was blown away how reasonable it was. And not only is your software very reasonable, but these courses you're offering, I'm Frank, what is Frank doing? He's just like, maybe he's getting senile or something in his old years. I feel like I don't want to sound like this is a sales job here, but it sounds, I mean, it's like you're giving this stuff away. There's really, it's
Where did I
really
put my car
reasonable.
keys?
So, I wanted to, just maybe touch upon that before we kind of start moving into the other stuff. But, just what made you want to do that? It really seems like just an excellent, excellent program.
Thank you. Having done the course at Columbia over a number of years, what I did learn among a number of things is that I started it off and didn't do it very well. And with each subsequent iteration, I kind of, through the interaction with the students, figured out, I think, how to do it a little bit better each time. And that's something I wanted to then try to see if I could kind of expand that beyond a situation with my physical presence. Let me just take a sidebar for a second and tell you about something that I discovered in doing the teaching that proved to be valuable, and it was exactly the opposite of how I started doing it. And the first couple of years I would teach it in real life. I would give my students case study examples, invented cases, and then I would give them my company software, and I would tell them to go figure this stuff out. And they would do it. And they would do it very quickly and easily because I gave them the tools to do it. They just had to plug numbers into a model. From that, I realized that maybe I really wasn't teaching them all that much after all. And so what I did after that was something entirely different, and essentially turning the whole, if you will, instructional process upside down, turning it on its head. In fact, I would tell students at the beginning, the first session of the class, I would tell them what it was I planned to do and encourage them to drop the course if they thought this was not going to be what they signed up for. But instead of, with the case studies at least, I would do something different from what I do with the rest of my instructional materials, which includes the instructional materials on the course. And I've built in some of these case studies now to the online course. But what that was that I did was to say, you can't use my company software. I want you to go and take a look at these cases the way I've given them to you, and go take out your Excel spreadsheet. Go figure out what you think this property is worth, and then put together a presentation that you can give to the other person on the other side of the deal to convince them that this is the price that you ought to pay to acquire it, or if you're the seller, this is the price that that other person ought to pay you to buy it. And it was a very interesting phenomenon that they would try this, and they would kind of get it wrong on the first try. But I wouldn't tell them how to do it. I would simply tell them, go do it, because this is how real life works. Somebody drops you in the deep end of the pool, and they say, go figure out how to do this. And so I would tell them what they did wrong, and so next time they would do fewer things wrong, and they'd be different things besides. And so with each subsequent pass on it, they would learn more and more how to do this by thinking like a real participant in a real deal. And that's the kind of case study approach I try to develop. And the case studies have been one of the most popular part of the online course. So essentially what I did with the online course was I tried to meld, if you will, the what I described a little earlier, real estate finance's greatest hits, where I take you step by step through all of the vocabulary, the metrics, the time value of money stuff in an instructional sort of way, but then build into it also this case study approach where I say, okay, here's a problem, here's a particular property. Now let's go see how it is. Go try and figure it out. Then watch me when I show you how I think you might figure it out. So I think that kind of combination is effective. At least it's worked effectively for me in the real life classes. And so the reason I tried to put together the online course is that, I can only teach so many students live and in person. Being an old dog as I am, I've got just so many teaching days in one semester that I'm really anxious to go out there and do this sort of thing. And especially with the kind of teaching style that I use, quite frankly, I'm not a stand behind the podium kind of guy. I insist that they give me a lapel mic, and I'm up and down the aisles in this auditorium. Last year they made my class a required course for the program, and so I've got I feel like I'm in Yankee Stadium there. So, on Bat Day. With all these students, so that's great that I can have that big an audience and do that live and in person. But there are a whole lot of people I think it can benefit from the same sort of material, and by doing it as an online video course, then I don't have to rely on me having enough energy to do that. In all over the country, I'm taking advantage of leveraging the power of the internet to be able to allow people to take this. They can take it on their computer, they can take it on their iPad, they can take it on their phone, whatever, and they can get all this material. And besides the lectures, I have I have quizzes in there. I have other resources like sample problems, math problems. So if you want to learn how to do an IRR calculation, or if you want to learn how to do a present value calculation or whatever, I have a whole bunch of problems that you can use as practice material in there. And one thing that we recently added to the course too is a digital certificate, so that if you actually complete the course, this is the full course that I'm talking about now. If you complete it and you get a reasonably good grade on all the quizzes that are in there, that we give you a digital certificate, something that you can attach right into your LinkedIn profile, your other social media profiles, and shows that you actually showed up and actually did this.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, our audience, primarily are folks that are either approaching retirement or already in retirement, and they're looking at a way to basically supplement their retirement income, and maybe in one of a number of different ways. Maybe they don't have enough with their pension and Social Security, whatever other sources they may have, to be able to really have the retirement that they want to have. Or they may be folks that they set their funds aside and they have plenty of funds, but they're concerned about getting a good return on those, so they may become passive investors. So with the folks that we have, what advice would you give to them about what they might be able to do, or to try to be effective real estate investors?
Well, they might want to consider doing something that kind of splits the difference between being passive and active, and it's something that actually gets back to the example I use with my students as to what kind of property may make sense for someone who is closer to retirement, where not unlike these time sensitive mutual funds that say you're going to get more conservative as you get closer to retirement, because someone who is on in years doesn't expect to have as many years to make up for a mistake as they might if they're a young pup,
right,
instead of an old dog. And keep on grabbing that metaphor, don't I? Anyway. So a triple net lease property is something to take into consideration. Maybe something like a single tenant, a triple net lease property, something that might be a little bit closer to affordable than buying a regional shopping center, but something where like a freestanding pharmacy might be the kind of example that I would use, and in fact do use in a lesson, where the return is not as great as if you were investing in a so-called value add kind of proposition, maybe where you're getting into a big apartment building or a mixed-use property where you can go in there and roll up your sleeves and really get involved and turn that cash flow around and create a lot of additional value. But with a triple net lease property, a person who is getting close to retirement is looking at a situation where it's probably going to be leased for a long term, and it's probably going to be, the idea of triple net. The three things that are the NNN are that the tenant's going to pay the property taxes, the tenant is going to pay the property insurance, and the tenant is going to pay for all the property maintenance. So most of the things that resemble the vagaries of investment, such as increase in taxes, for example, or increase in insurance, are not so worrisome because the tenant is paying for those things. And the thing that represent both expense and work, which is the property maintenance, also becomes the obligation of the tenant. Of course, by throwing off some of this risk onto the tenant, you have to expect a lower return than you would make with other kinds of property. But it tends to be a more secure return than with other kinds of property. And it has all the related benefits of having a real estate asset as part of your portfolio. So for someone who's thinking about retirement, that may be the kind of property that you can own and manage without some of the issues that a more aggressive property would encompass. And I not only talk the talk, but I walk the walk. That's the kind of property I have.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's really good. Really good. I like that approach too, especially having to deal with those variables like property taxes and things that can change over time. That's excellent. Now, you talked about the educational side, and I know that that's obviously a strong focus of your efforts. What else do you have ahead? What's sort of your plan for your business? And I know you're in a lot of different places, but what's sort of your future plan for your business?
Well, we've got two arms of the business, if you will. There's the software, and that keeps on keeping on. We are always we're at the point in our life cycle where I've got guys who handle the customer support and the customer care, and so they're talking to the users of our software on a daily basis. And part of their mission is to be finding out what are people looking for to do today. Maybe they weren't as so concerned about yesterday, or maybe even vice versa. What is it that they don't care about trying to do as much today as they did before? And we keep on tweaking the analysis applications to try to meet the needs of our customers as well as we can, both the income property investors and the developers. We've got on the income property side, we've got two versions of the income property analysis, one that we call professional and one we call express, so that people who are kind of just getting into things could start off with a somewhat simpler analysis model. Those who are into partnerships and all the rest would go with the professional level. So there's the software side, and that's obviously a key focus and has been for now a couple of decades. And on the educational side, the course, as I get feedback from students, we add additional modules to it, additional lectures to it, additional content. One of the things I promise that, if you get into the course and I add content, well, you have access to it. You don't have to go, buying the course again if I add more material. So, for example, added a section on partnerships at one point, and we add a section on development analysis, which can be applied to even something as simple as a fix up and resell of a property. So the ongoing plan for the online course is to add more and more content to it as the people who are taking the course say, I wish you had talked more about this, or I wish you had talked more about that. Well, okay, I'm listening. And so if folks tell us that they'd like a lecture on a particular topic that I haven't covered, we're going to add it to it.
That's great. Hey, fellow old dogs. Before we jump into our wrap it up session, I just wanted to let you know that an important part of being a successful real estate investor is knowing how to regularly reduce your expenses. It's a big part of what I do every day to maintain a healthy real estate portfolio. Well, I try to do the same thing with my personal finances as well. And when I heard about a life insurance company that gives exclusive rates to those of us old dogs who try to eat right, exercise, and stay healthy, I got very stoked. Like saving money on your car insurance for being a good driver, Health IQ saves you money on your life insurance for living a health-conscious lifestyle. For those of us who are trying to be healthy and keep our expenses down at the same time, it just makes sense. Learn more and get a free quote at healthiq.com/old dog. That's healthiq.com/old dog. We have a little section in our interview here where we just ask you a series of quick questions just to kind of, to get reference sources and to learn some more about what available resources are out there. And we call it our wrap it up session, where I ask you a series of quick questions. If you are ready, I can go ahead and let's get started on our wrap it up.
Okay, I don't promise to have any good answers, but I'll try.
Okay. All right. Well, what's your favorite real estate book? Of course, it had to be other than your own, but...
Oh, darn. Actually, you probably gathered from what I was saying before, when I was trashing everybody else's book, that I find it very difficult to identify too many that I actually would want to recommend to anyone else. But there is one I want to mention. It's one called The Complete Real Estate Encyclopedia. It's a paperback by Denise and William Evans. And this is a terrific book, because when I say you got to know what the words mean, it's in kind of a dictionary format. But I mean, every real estate investment and real estate development term that you could ever think of is in here, and then you could look it up if you're not exactly sure what it meant. I mean, I got the book at hand here because it's something that I use myself. So if I open up to a random page here, floor area ratio, okay, or let's try a different one, flex space, or flip, or float, or floating lien. Just about any term you could want to use and use correctly, you can find out what it means in there in very readable English.
That's a great book. I didn't know about that one. I'm going to add that to my list. That's great. How about favorite business book?
Oh, I think this... This is going to be, especially with the stock market being the way it is these last couple of days, this one probably keep you up at night. Like The Big Short by Michael Lewis. I mean, there's a caution. I don't really very often read business books more than once, but I read that one twice just to make sure I understood at least 60% of it. But it really is a kind of a vital cautionary tale of how we should look at real estate and be realistic, not just assume, as unfortunately so many people do, that that real estate just goes up because it goes up in value, and that there are things that may be lurking below the surface there that you got to keep your eye on, and to have a cautious and maybe even sometimes jaundiced eye that you keep out.
Great recommendation. How about maybe a valuable website for real estate investing success other than your own? Again,
one that I might mention, has it has a lot of pros and maybe a couple of cons. Is biggerpockets.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's great in terms of being able where especially where beginners can take advantage of the willingness of some really experienced, really smart guys who will give help. there is the thing that I like about it. There are many things I like about it, but among them is the fact that there is no self-promotion allowed. I mean, from time to time, I've answered a question. I've accidentally said something, about the wonder of me or whatever.
With those Amazon links to your book,
exactly.
just in passing.
I get smacked in the side of the head with a 2x4 within minutes. They just delete it. So you can't have any kind of self-promotion. It's peer-to-peer help, and of course that its strength is it's also its occasional downside that sometimes the peer-to-peer who may be answering your question doesn't have as much experience as you might prefer. But for the most part, there are people there who just are so generous with their time in terms of helping beginning investors those forums are really very valuable.
Yeah, good stuff there. How about a favorite app? I mean, you're a tech guy, and I know you're an old dog, so some of us old dogs don't get into apps, but
not for real estate. I don't think I've ever found. You can obviously go to things like Zillow and Trulia and whatnot, and occasionally be entertained by that kind of stuff. But as much as I am a fairly obsessive, smartphone user, if you had to actually measure the time I spend on apps, probably 80% of it is on Google Maps and Waze, so I don't get lost. Maybe that's a good.
That's my favorite.
There might be a message there somewhere.
The only problem I have is I used to know how to get places. It's like
I was going to say exactly the same thing. There's a real downside to this. In the past, I would have kind of a visual image in my mind of where I was in relationship to everything else, and now I don't pay attention anymore.
Yeah,
I just listen to the directions, and all of a sudden I find I'm there. Now, how do I get back?
Yeah, there's a market that's just a block from my house, and I have to put on Google Maps just to get up. No, I'm just kidding. How about a favorite quote?
Oh, I think I'm going to give you Yogi Berra. If you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else. And
that's great. Great
quote. I think that's that's a variation of one that I think comes from Alice in Wonderland. But if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But I like Yogi's better, because if you don't know where you're going, who the heck knows where you're going to end up? So if you don't know why you're investing in a particular property, okay, then back up for a minute and ask yourself, why am I doing this?
Right. Great. Well, let's see if we can stump you on this one. Okay, let's say you have lost everything. You've lost all of your assets. You're just pretty much everything. Maybe you've got a home to live in or what have you, but all you have is $1,000. How would you use that $1,000 to try to rebuild your business and bring back the what you had lost?
I think that's actually an easy one. Because I would spend it on education. I would ask somebody who actually knows what to do. For example, I might ask, let's say our business had no more sales. I'd get someone who could educate me in what's new and what works in marketing. Or if I were, whatever it is, I think I would use it to get expert advice, expert education from someone who could lead me out of the woods.
That's great. Good investment. You cannot lose investing in your education. That's great. Before we go, there is something I want to share with our listeners here, which I am really actually very excited about, is that we talked about your educational program, your new program. Everybody listening, I think, has an interest, or they wouldn't be listening to this podcast, because this is a podcast where there's tons of information about how to succeed at real estate investing, and our focus is cash flow. And you are, is your second title here, the godfather of real estate cash flow, through your wonderful book. But you have extended a special offer to our guests that I want to let everybody know about, which I think is just awesome, and I think extremely generous. And that is that our guests could get access to your new educational program and the videos and all the other stuff that you have there at a 30% off discount, which is like amazing because it is so reasonable already. I'm just like blown away by this. I mean, do you want to address that a little bit and just
Yeah.
let people know what this is all about?
What I'd like to offer is an opportunity for people to get their feet wet a little bit. We have essentially what is a subset of our big course, which is the case study section, which is probably the most popular section within the course. And so if anyone would like to enroll in that, where you would go is realdata.com/cases. And you can get that course, which is, as I say, is a subset of the big one that has 50 some odd lessons in it, by entering the promo code DAWG, DAWG, and we're going to keep that promo code alive and well for about let's say 2 weeks or so after this podcast airs, so you have time to scratch your head and think about it. There's a secondary benefit, by the way, and that is if you decide after you've gone through those case studies that you'd like to actually enroll in the larger course, we'll credit that amount toward an upgrade into the bigger course. So this gives you a chance to look at some of the good stuff where we talk about an apartment building, about a mixed use building, and about a triple net lease building. And we give you a sample problem, and then we take you through a couple of videos on each, showing you kind of step by step how you would pick apart the analysis of that investment property.
That's great. Just so you guys know, too, that when you go into the form for this, you just have to look for the word coupon code and click on that, and that's where you'll input DAWG. So, guys, that's great. That's a great offer. Thank you, Frank, and I think people are going to really enjoy that. I'm more of like a case study guy, too. I like to see real stuff, and what really happens, and to be able to look at it. So I think that's a great introduction to your other program, which is neat. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are listening here too that also would love to find out more about what you do and maybe even want to reach you. What's the best way to connect people with your companies and yourself?
Easiest thing to do is to go to realdata.com and to just send us a support ticket. Because it'll end up, just say, in the support ticket, say, "Hi, Frank," and ask me your question, and they'll pass it on to me. Rather than doing an email address, because unfortunately we've been on the web since 1996, and we were foolish enough back then to put our email address on a website, so we don't do that anymore because now I get 5,000 spam messages to that email address a day. So we use the support ticket kind of approach to making communications. But trust me, it'll get through. So just go to realdata.com. You can, while you're there, you can find out about our software products. You can find out about more about the course. It's at learn.realdata.com. So all of those things are ways that you can find out more about us, and you can communicate with me. And I'm happy to hear from you.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for that, Frank. And I'm sure that you're going to hear from some people here, definitely. We're also going to have a link to your books on our website as well, so that if people have not read it already, those that are listening, I think most of them feel that cash flow is king, and they should definitely pick up your number one book that I think should be part of everybody's library, what every real estate investor needs to know about cash flow. Frank, we look like we're at the end of the line here, but we're not completely over with this episode.
Bill, this has been a real howl.
Glad you haven't forgot, Frank. I know you're a New Yorker. You probably haven't heard too many dogs howl.
No, I'm a Connecticut guy, actually. I'm close to New York.
Oh,
and I'm actually on the Connecticut side of the line here. So,
okay. There's some dogs in Connecticut. They got all kinds of animals in the forests of Connecticut over there, don't they?
Yeah, I got deer in the backyard here.
Oh, that's great. And they have foxes, I understand, too, and stuff. That's really neat. Well, good. Then you can give us a good old hound dog howl. Are you ready for this, Frank?
I'll try. This is not my usual gig, but I'll do what I can here. Oh.
I love it. Even the little pant. Okay, that was the first I think that was the first hound dog pant we had. So this is great.
It was actually a pair of pants.
A pair of pants. See, this is the kind of stuff that grandfathers do. You know, we got these bad puns. You know, my kids are always kidding. Well, Frank, I can't thank you enough for coming on. There's some great stuff here. I'm really excited to be able to, present this to our audience, and I'm sure they're going to pick up a lot of great info and tons of resources. And so, again, on behalf of all of our listeners, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. It's actually a lot of fun. Beats working for a living.
Hey, you got that. Well, I also want to thank all those old dog listeners out there for joining us today. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, but the fact that you've taken the time to join us means a lot, and we greatly appreciate it. And please note, old dog listeners, everything presented here, and there are tons of links and a lot of references here. They can all be accessed. And I know if you've been trying to, as you're driving along, writing notes as Frank is talking, I hope you weren't doing that on the freeway here, or highway. We have pretty detailed show notes. And so you'll be able to get a recap of everything that Frank talked about, and as well as the links at our website at olddogsreinetwork.com/blog. And then just look for the episode with Frank Gallinelli. That is it for today. That's the show. And remember, cash flow is king and real estate investing the means. Until next time, keep moving forward, and may God bless.
Thank you very much for visiting the Old Dogs REI Network. We would greatly appreciate if you would stop by iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. We would love if you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. The more ratings and reviews we receive, the more visible the podcast will be to others. Thank you.